What's up, everybody? The wait is finally over and totally over. Left at Wall is available now, right now. You can get Left at Wall on Apple TV, Google Play, YouTube Movies. You can get it on demand. You can buy it on DVD. The wait is totally over. Just type in Left at Wall on your search bar on your smart TV, and you can find a bunch of ways to get it. You can watch it now. Again, that's Left at Wall, wherever you get your movies. Episode 72. Bryant Odega. Bryant Odega is an educator and activist. His first memory is of ICE coming to deport his father. He recently graduated from Harvard. I first became aware of Bryant when he ran for city council in my district in Los Angeles. In the times we're living in, many people are wondering what they can do and how they can fight back. I think this episode helps answer, or at least partially answer, that question. Please welcome to the show, Bryant Odega. Bryant Odega, good to see you again, buddy. It's been a minute.
Hey, Ron. Good to see you, too. Yeah, it's been a while. I don't know, like a year or two since the last time I hopped on the show. It feels good to be back.
Oh, I'm glad to hear it. It's we're getting some much needed rain here in SoCal at the present moment, which is very, very good. It's nice to see. So let's start at the beginning. And I know that, I've interviewed you on my old show, Get Your News On with Ron. So some of this I already know, but tell me about your origin story. Where are you from? And what led you to become the Bryant Odega that we're going to dive into?
Yeah, thank you again for having me on previously as well. I always love being in conversation with folks, especially amazing folks like yourself. I guess quick background on me. So I was born and raised in Los Angeles, born to two immigrant parents from Nigeria. My dad was a taxi cab driver, and my mom, she's a home health nurse. And so, very, working class roots. And I grew up in early years in like South LA, but I've lived pretty much the majority of my life here in the Harbor area. And went to public schools. And, when I was in elementary school, perhaps around like third or fourth grade, my father got deported, actually. He was detained by ICE. And I think this is my first memory, actually, of Terminal Island, San Pedro area, like that bridge that you see a lot in a lot of politicians, media who represent the Harbor area. And my first time going to that bridge was to go to the detention center where they held, basically, we call it detention center, but it's basically a prison where they held my father. And I never really got to actually see him in that carceral system because my mom didn't want me and my younger sister, who was maybe 3 years old at the time, to see him in his jumpsuit. And so the second time I remember seeing him was at the airport, LAX. My first time going to the airport was to see him off. And so that was, of course, a difficult time. My mom, she was at El Camino College, and she ended up withdrawing to work full-time instead to take care of me and my younger sister. We, struggled to make ends meet. And I started working part-time in high school, although it was a tutoring job, and so I was able to, help support home while also learning about education as a vehicle for advancing equity. I followed my mom's footsteps. I went to El Camino College, and I was proud. So I always remain a proud alumni of the community college system, where I graduated in 2018, the first of my family to graduate from college, transferred to UCLA. And, these two periods were really pivotal in my journey because I was trying to figure out if I wanted to do nursing track or healthcare, because there's a lot of pressure, especially in Nigerian households, to pursue the medical profession. But after 2016, my first presidential election, and seeing the campaign of Bernie Sanders, I wanted to get him, and then seeing the election of Donald Trump, I wanted to get involved, or at least learn more about politics. And I got involved in different levels of government, state senators, members of Congress, different campaigns. Then I also joined grassroots movements with Sunrise, movement for climate justice, as I started to become more conscious about the climate crisis. And this led to a variety of different pathways and tracks. But ultimately, my lived experience and my experience really with the Sunrise Movement and also the rise of politicians like Bernie and the Squad and others, and locally here with Fatima, inspired me to run for LA City Council in 2022, where I was one of the first Gen Z residents to run for LA City Council, as well as one of the youngest, if not the youngest Black person in LA to run for LA City Council. And I was working as well while I was doing this. For working class folks, you can never really stop working. I was working at my neighborhood high school, and after the campaign was over, I worked there full time. And then I went to grad school. I went to the Harvard Ed School, where I got my master's in education and my credential in social studies. And I still taught ethnic studies, and that was also quite a year as well. Given all of the college protests for like a free Palestine, and so that was also another pivotal moment. And so now I'm back and doing the thing here with UTLA and teaching full time now as a AP African American Studies and Ethnic Studies teacher, and still doing the work to advance a movement that centers people over profits.
And how old are you now?
So I'm 27. I'm turning 28 this year.
Wow. It's incredible, man.
30.
It's incredible. And I met you, of course, during your run for office. That's how I first became aware of you. And I was a big fan, big supporter, still am. And so let's kind of get into, what was it like for you? Because you were very young. Were you aware of what was happening to your father? Like, were you aware that they just didn't want him to be here? And why was it that your father, when you saw him off at LAX, was that him being deported?
Yeah.
So why was it that they went after your father but not your mom? Like how did all that work?
Yeah. So I didn't know when I was younger. My mom would tell me more when I got older, more of the details. And there's still a lot that I still don't know, to be honest. And so what I do remember is being young, it was late night. And I remember hearing like knocking on the door. And like, I just remember, if I can recall, like, I don't know, like a flash shot or something. Like, I just remember just knocking on the door. My father wasn't home at the time, but I would later, when I got older, would find out that it was actually ICE that was looking for him. And my dad, he was like trying to escape, trying to avoid detention, or he was working a late night shift because he worked very long hours at night, and so they missed him. And so,
what did he do? What was his job? What was his
he was
job?
a taxi cab driver.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so he drove taxis. So that was before Uber destabilized the whole industry here in LA. But he drove taxis, and actually was pretty proud that my dad was a taxi cab driver, because all the other kids at elementary school would get picked up by, regular cars, Toyotas and Hondas and stuff. But I'll get picked up by, either a yellow cab or a black Lincoln. So I felt like Zach and Cody on Disney Channel. And so that was one fact that I knew. And then really the main reason why they were coming after him was because he was undocumented. He overstayed his visa. My mom already had her citizenship. And so she wasn't a target. I mean, with this administration now, like, she probably would have been still.
Oh, we're going to get into it.
Yeah.
Don't worry. We're going to get there.
Okay. And so thankfully, she wasn't a target. And so it was really just my dad because he overstayed his visa. And That was really the only like violation he committed. Like he, had a pretty clean record. He minded his business, and he drove a taxi. Was trying to raise, two kids.
It's just, I mean, that's just something no child should ever have to go through. And the fact that your dad was married to a citizen and they just deported him anyways, it's just remarkable of what we do here, and just so gross. And it's, man, so let's move forward a little bit. So you touched on this briefly, but let's revisit your run for office. I mean, what really made you decide you're going to jump into this? What made you pick city council? And then final question on that, what was your biggest learning experience from all that?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I still reflect on it to this day. And I think after the election, I think it was only up until like a year later where I actually like posted like something about the campaign because like even to this day I'm still processing. 2020 was a huge year for me. I was at UCLA. It was my senior year. It was my dream school. I've been wanting to go to UCLA since I was in middle school, even though, I didn't have I was like the best student in high school, let's just say. And so I'm doing the thing at UCLA. Winter quarter 2020, January to March, I'm doing my capstone project in Washington, D.C., where I am researching, because I'm a labor studies minor, while I'm also doing a major in political science, and I'm involved with Sunrise Right. And so my research was on how to bridge the gap between the labor movement and the climate justice movements. And so I was really interested in that because I remember, AOC and Ed Markey announcing the Green New Deal, and there was some like backlash from like labor. And so I was curious about it. I'm like, wait a second, climate justice is a working class issue. And so I went to study it, and I interned for a member of Congress here in the Harbor area who was in the Energy and Commerce Committee. So it was a lot of, the stars were aligning, and I got to meet AOC, although briefly. And that was also a huge moment for me because her candidacy as a working class person of color, running on abolishing ICE and, Medicare for all and Green New Deal was really resonant with someone like myself. And so, but then the pandemic hit, right? The week I'm coming back home, Congress was basically a ghost town. Everything was shut down, jobs, shut down. And so it was really hard, everything was online. I extended my, my year with UCLA. I withdrew from my last quarter. I was just so depressed, and I finished in the summer pretty strong. But what kind of brought me back out was, like the movement for, for George Floyd, for Breonna Taylor, for Andres Guardado, for many of the Black and brown folks who were being killed. And I mean, I was always aware of this, right? In high school, I remember Trayvon Martin and, all these young Black folks, killed by police or by white supremacists or both, right? But just seeing the shift in the world, not just the country, but the world, like really brought me back out and engagements with community. At the same time, while all this is happening, I'm also on the neighborhood council for my neighborhood. And so, as I'm like depressed and stuff, I'm also like still going to the meetings, and I'm getting reports on what they're doing in LA City Hall, on the votes that they're making, on a variety of things. And then I'm also a campaign fellow for Holly Mitchell, who was running for LA County Supervisor for District 2. And so, I mean, there was a number of things that happened. I think the few things that ultimately led me to running was, on one, the People's Budget LA Coalition, led by Black Lives Matter Los Angeles, along with other community organizations, were, trying to help deconstruct, the budget, right? As this thing, instead of being it from like the mayor proposing whatever they want and the city council just rubber stamping it, rather being, coming from the people, right? The people who pay the taxes that fund these things. And so it was a really instructional experience for me, learning about the People's Budget Coalition. And I asked about, sorry, I'm babysitting.
Oh,
Thank you. Just a little one. Want to say hi? I don't know if you can hear him.
No, I did. Well, tell them hello.
Okay, that's my nephew.
Aw.
And so I remember asking about where our council member at the time, Joe Buscaino, a former police officer and a Democrat, but really a Republican, in closet, a closeted Republican, and and like they were not supportive of allocating funds from police to other services, which was one of the biggest demands of that year. You have folks from in LUSD, you have, Students Deserve, Black youth demanding school police being defunded and putting into programs that repair a lot of the harm that was done to our youth. Because there's so much research to show how police actually make things worse in our schools. And also there's research to show that police aren't the solution to every crisis or every situation we have.
Well, we're really living that right now, big time, aren't we? I mean, they have not. I mean, you literally see even Karen Bass just making things up about like, oh, they stopped 19 people randomly. I mean, it wasn't even clear. What were those 19 people doing? They might have just been people trying to get home or trying to see what was going on. The police have been completely useless during this fire, completely useless. And we're seeing, hey, that money that was supposed to go to the fire department went to the cops. And yeah, it's just business as usual. There's no reason. I mean, that's why it's a good thing we got Kenneth Mejia in there to just blow the whistle on all this. He's just showing you this is the budget. And you see this obscene number for police. It's like, well, clearly this is grossly inefficient. And that's putting it gently. And then there's people out there who still say, well, we need to give the police more money. 54% of our budget isn't enough. It's like, I don't know what planet you're on.
That propaganda is real. As a huge, Olayemi, she's an abolitionist lawyer, and she talks a lot about, like, I learned a lot, just from her, but also like reading, like End Policing and Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, like the way that like police and like culture, like the way the police have infiltrated our politics and our culture. To this day has huge ramifications where you even have people of color who, like some parents who want the police to come back because of concerns over, safety with fights and stuff. And, I think it comes from a place of wanting safety, but I think as elected officials, especially those who have, so shout out to Kenneth Mejia, we need more elected officials who have the moral backbone to be real and do the real courageous work of shifting, our conception of what makes sense in terms of safety. Police, don't make us safe, especially in, like with homelessness, right? I think one of the biggest communities that are impacted by police like violence are our unhoused community, actually. And like the police, they don't know how to do community outreach. That's not their job. They're not trained for that, right, either. And they have all these weapons and stuff. And so this is what I was really learning a lot in 2020. I was reading Angela Davis as well. And so it came down to really two things that propelled me to run. One was the vote. So Buscaino was one of three council members to vote against the reallocating of funds from police to other programs, even though our district.
It was only three?
Was it one or three or one or two? I think it was him and the Republican or the Independent. And our district, was the third highest recipients of those funds. And so, literally voting against your own constituents' interests because of your allegiance to the police and, industrial complex. And it was that. And then this clip that I'm sure you've seen or heard of where he's complaining about buckets of feces because there's, from unhoused folks.
Oh, was that the, like it was on Fox News or something like that?
I think it was Fox News, but I think he also talked about it at LA City Hall too, complaining about this stuff. And so they started to call him Joey Buckets out of mockery. And what frustrated me a lot about those two things. One, voting against your constituents' interests, but also two, you're complaining about the, human waste all everywhere, but like you're the city council member. You can do something about this. Why don't we have public restrooms everywhere? Like it's so hard to use the restroom, even for myself in downtown LA, because it's just so inaccessible, So imagine, right, you're unhoused, and that just makes compounds even worse. And so, it was my frustration over the lack of leadership on those issues. And then as I started to research more about the history of the district with, the urban oil fields and his lack of, leadership on that. And, I was basically, I guess, putting myself on a path towards running, because it definitely was not part of the plan. Like I just graduated from college. I've got my degree in the mail because of the pandemic, and I want to become a sub. And I was trying to start my education career. I want to pivot to being a teacher instead of doing politics. And, and so it was those moments. And then Fatima, I think it was on Twitter, like people were trying to find someone who's going to run against him. And so I was like debating whether I should do it or not. Like, what really made me like hesitant was the fact that I was young. I think I was 21 or 22 when I filed. I'm working class. I'm first gen American, first gen college student. And like I'm, if I'm going to run as a grassroots candidate, and so, big money is real. And I guess what really ultimately pushed me to run was when Fatima, I think someone asked her if she was going to run. And at the time, she wasn't living in the district. And so her response was she was going to find someone else to run. And so that's when I directly reached out to her. I was like, hey, Fatima.
So that's how you guys kind of teamed up. Because, she ran for state assembly twice.
Yeah.
And then at one point they kind of redistricted her, and then but she was able to maneuver around that. We don't need to get into all those specifics. We'll get off into the weeds, but just to give people a little bit of background, Fatima Iqbal-Zubair, another person who I am a big fan and supporter of. I think you and her were the only endorsements I gave. Because I don't like to endorse, especially not on the federal level, which, neither of you were. I don't really. I mean, obviously, neither of you were federal level, so it was okay. But yeah. Well, let me ask you this as far as electoral politics goes, because I'd be curious. One of my frustrations that I have voiced greatly with the squad is the fact that they don't vote as a block. I mean, we saw it time and time again, and I understand the whole, well, they're still their own people. Like, yeah, but if you don't vote as a block, you have to if you want to wield any power. That's just how it works. So do you share that frustration, or what's your take on that?
Yeah, I've been extremely curious about the dynamics of the squad and of Bernie Sanders and Warren, maybe a few other elected officials in the federal level. And I've read actually, some of their books, just trying to get like understanding of like who these people are and like why do they move the way that they move. And I do share that frustration of why they didn't move as a block, why there's not as much, I feel, like real insurgency, or at least one that, we could see. But
like we all know you're outnumbered. No one disputes that. We can all count. But if you don't sort of like wield together as an axe, a metaphorical axe, of course, then you're never going to get anywhere.
Yeah. It's I think, when I read Ryan Grimm's book on the squad, actually. So I think it came out last year or 2 years ago. Very timely, because he also talks about AIPAC, heavily about AIPAC. And when you read that book, I feel a lot of things make a lot more sense or provides more clarity. And I do think it does come down to like the individual, like AOC, he writes about how, she tries to, she wants to be like a good, legislator, and, because of the numbers, you have to build relationships, and that, is constraining if you're also like, if you're also like organizing against them. And like my question or like my issue is like I get it, wanting to be the constituent, understanding how the House of Reps works, and it's a numbers game, and this and the third. But at the same time, when we're talking about like power, right? Like a lot of these people like see these folks as a threat, and so there's only so much you can do to try to appease or try to play their game. My opinion, like when we look at Jamal Bowman, like how many of these folks actually came down to support him? This was the most expensive race in recent history, if not U.S. history, period. And it was largely because of AIPAC, largely because he was critical of, genocide that's taking place. You have Cori Bush, second, most expensive race in that cycle. And one of the things that they were using against her was the fact that she voted against one of Joe Biden's, his Build Back Better program, which, I don't know, it was just, and it was just crazy, seeing these folks not coming down for her, and crazy in the sense of like, wow, this is really happening, but not really crazy, because at the end of the day, when we're talking about power, who runs the party, it is the corporate elites. And so,
yeah, well, that's what they're all faced with. They're faced with, and that's just the reality. They are faced with a decision. Hey, you play it the company way, and you get a ticket to Easy Street.
Right. They won't put you in they won't make you the chair of the committee.
Yeah. But you don't play it the company way, they're going to try to get rid of you. And you just see that time and time again. I mean, I think for Rashida Tlaib, she's got a good relationship in her district. So they can't get rid of her yet, but they are going to try. They are going to try to get rid of her. And so it really is, the system is just rotten to the core. That's why I have more enthusiasm locally. I'm not saying there's not, corruption going on at the local level. Of course there is, but it's just,
oh yes, have you seen that as a council?
Yeah, right. But it's just, there's a lot more transparency in comparison, and there is a chance for someone like you, and for someone who, at least is going to put a district first and make good moves locally. For me, it's kind of like, I want a city council person, who shares a lot of my views, but I also want a city council person who's going to make the right decisions for my district. And that is even more important than do they look great on paper? You know what I mean? So, well, moving forward to Harvard then. So what was that like?
Yeah, Harvard was a crazy experience. When I was applying for grad school, there was 7 schools I wanted to apply to. I only ultimately ended up applying to 6. And I was sharing like my journey with my students, because I think my neighborhood has like less than 25% or so. There's a very small number of people who have like a bachelor's degree, let alone a master's, in this area. And so, I want to be transparent in my process, like what I'm doing, the interviews I'm taking. A lot of these schools were on the East Coast, and so they got to see some of those Zoom interviews that I was in, those information sessions. And then when I would visit, I'll travel, I'll take pictures, and I'll show them, like what I've been seeing, and they really loved, begrudgingly, or at least I feel like they loved when I went to the bodega for the first time in New York. And I was like, oh, it's Odega at the bodega. Really dragged that joke. But I went there to visit Teachers College at Columbia University, which was one of the schools I was really interested in going to, because of their history of like social justice. And Shirley Chisholm was one of my inspirations, the unbossed Shirley Chisholm, who's an alum of Teachers College. And but I also got into all the other schools I applied to. And I guess what really made me choose Harvard ultimately was like the experience. Like I wanted to, you hear so much, right? Growing up, I watch Suits. I'm a huge Suits fan. I mean, also, it was well funded, and there was a lot. The program was good and great faculty, and so it definitely, it wasn't an impulsive decision. But and so I ultimately chose Harvard, and that was a tumultuous year. As a working class person, as a person from immigrant background, etc. Navigating life in grad school. There's a research paper or a book called like the Privileged Poor. Being like poor and being in these spaces, like, yeah, you're there, but the lived experiences that other folks have, like, are things that, I couldn't have even dreamed of. 'Cause I didn't even know they, where things actually happen. Like the trips people would go to, the type of programs people would have. Like, it was crazy. It was crazy. And, that summer affirmative action was overturned. And, that, made things, awkward, to put it lightly, because it was like, I think only 3 Black people, in my program was like 100 of us.
Wow.
And only 2 of us. And then and just for context, like in the US, like less than 9% of teachers in the country, is like hundreds of thousands of teachers, less than 9% are Black, less than 2% are Black men. And to really feel like a unicorn, in these spaces, but also like a target as well, didn't really feel at home in Cambridge. Not that, I thought I would, because I was also reading The Legacy of Slavery at Harvard and all these other things. Like, I knew that I was entering a space that has these ties to all types of stuff, and so all these universities do. And so, I wasn't like naive, but the lived reality of being there was something else. And so, it was also healing in other areas. Like, I met all my program folks were pretty cool people. I met some great educators. My students I taught in Hyde Park, which is the southernmost neighborhood in Boston. And it was just beautiful student teaching ethnic studies there. In October 1st, was Nigerian Independence Day. And I remember bringing one of my classmates to help me take pictures, and I posted it, just, wearing Nigerian, colors and the flag, just to honor the ancestors and uplift my culture. It's always important for me to ground myself in my roots. And then, 6 days later, October 7th happens. And from what I knew at that point of Israel and Palestine, I knew that what was going to happen afterwards was, a genocide. I wouldn't have imagined like the scale, but I knew Israel was going to be extremely, I just knew it was going to be really bad. And so that was like another educational moment for me, because I remember it was my first time being introduced to Palestine. When I was running for the city council, we put out a statement in solidarity, but that was, the extent, right, that I went. At Harvard, I feel like it gave me a second chance to really learn more about Palestine, and also really learn more about colonization. I feel like if you learn about Palestine, you learn about colonization at work. And the same can also be said about, Black studies. When you read Black Reconstruction by Dr. W. Du Bois, some of the things that we're seeing today, it's almost like prophetic in a very spooky way or just parallels of what's going on right now. And so I joined AFRO, which is the African American Resistance Organization, one of the organizations that were leading a lot of the protests on campus, including the encampments, and we did teach-ins, including on Sudan and Congo. And I was involved with the Boston Teachers Union, Ethnic Studies Committee, speaking on Palestine and Black solidarity. It was a really powerful experience. My third time going to DC, first time was community college advocacy trip. Second time was UCLA. Third time was for the March for Palestine. And there was over 300,000 people. And it was just so beautiful seeing so many folks from different ages, different backgrounds, like here. And I just remember this one moment where there was like a huge Palestine flag, and we're all like under it, trying to reach for the flag, and you see the colors, glowing down from the sun. And it was a really heartening moments in a time of crises. And graduation comes, and you end up walking out on the commencement. When I went to Harvard, I did not, that was not what I, was on the dream board, but with everything that was going on, and then the repression also from universities, from the Harvard president, from who I was seeing at Columbia, who I was seeing at UCLA with the police brutality against students, in the backdrop of universities talking about they care about student safety, right, that safety talking point, right, to justify or to excuse, police violence, or like safety not being consistent, right, safe for whom, because these students were either being physically brutalized or in other low-key ways being suspended, right, having their funding suspended. And in that point, that was also instructional to me about what is the purpose of education, and so, I learned a lot. I'm still learning, still reflecting, still reading, still organizing, because I think what all these things comes down to is power, who has it, how it's wielded, the principles informing, power. I mentioned how I'm still reflecting on my candidacy for LA City Council. And you also asked why LA City Council. I chose to run locally because, local has the most impact on your day-to-day life, right? But also, all politics is local. And when you see who runs our government, it's typically not the folks who are the majority, right? It's people who have the means to run. It's the people who are funded by the privileged, rich few. And so, and what I learned from that, even though I didn't win like the campaign, but I never felt guilty either because of how transformational it was for my own education. Like being a grassroots candidate, right, it forces you have to be outside. You have to meet people where they're at, everywhere. And so I was talking to folks in the projects, talking to folks, who are unhoused. A lot of folks are unhoused because, they're constituents too. Speaking to, people from Wilmington, Spanish speakers, like it was a lot. And hearing their stories, hearing their conceptions of what they want to see happen in their community, really was foundational to me in terms of how I want to approach my, not just organizing, but also my teaching practices. What I think has helped me become, a good a teacher, because really, based on relational politics, like getting to know my students, building relationship, building that rapport, because we're trying to teach, for change. Like, you can have the most radical curriculum, but if you're still enacting a politics of domination in the classroom, which has pushed, which I never wanted to be a teacher because of my experience with that. Seeing professors who saw me as a human being that made me see things different. Like being that teacher that's rooted in critical pedagogy that Paulo Freire and bell hooks talk about, that is about moving beyond the confines of systems of oppression, but really about helping our students, just like helping our community tap into their own power, and see how they can combine their resources to create a change that they need, the change that they deserve. And so,
Brian, I were you able? So I'll give everyone a peek under the hood here. I lost internet briefly. Yeah, and so, but somehow it must not have went out on your end.
No.
So I unfortunately, it looks like everything recorded.
Okay.
But I was not present for all of your answers. So I'm letting people know because I'm just going to kind of move to my next question here.
Yeah.
But I'm sure I would have had some thoughts as to what you were saying too, or some follow-ups. But yeah, no worries. I'm glad it didn't kick off for you. But we did mention to folks it's raining right now. We're getting some much need rain here in Southern California. But one of the disadvantages when you live in a place where it rains so infrequently, when it does, sometimes your internet is a casualty.
Mm.
But well, so again, under the pretext of I missed some of your answer, just going to move to the next question. Where do you get your hope?
Yeah, where do I get my hope? I love that. I love talking about hope because it's what keeps us going, right? Like in the darkness, as Toni Morrison would describe it, like how do you do the work in the darkness? Like what gives me hope is really the young people, the students that I teach, because like each student, it's like a world, right, of experience, of ideas, of perspectives. And, when we teach ethnic studies, when we use like ethnic studies, like pedagogy, or like when you approach teaching like through like a decolonial lens, like you treat your students like intellectuals. And so moving in that context, right, where we're facilitating discussions about all types of stuff where students' voice also shape the curriculum. Like I learned a lot from them about hope. I learned a lot about them about all types of different issues. Youth culture, like in hip hop, right, is one of the driving forces that keeps it going. And like with the Not Like Us, right, in reaction to the type of capitalistic commodification of hip hop that folks like Drake represents, and like seeing like folks coming together, right, in solidarity in response to that and creating something new. We've seen that time and time and again, right, with 2020, with young folks, but also people of different backgrounds and ages coming out, right? So much so, right, a huge shift that how all these white supremacists shook, right? Now they're trying to ban, everything, and they're trying to do all these cop sees ever because they saw just a glimpse, right, of what's possible when we like see each other as, as what Dr. King says, beloved community, and so that gives me hope. The climate justice movement gives me hope. The climate crisis is scary. Like I will be honest, there was a time where
we're living it right now, my friend.
We are
living it right now.
Absolutely. And, I'll be honest and say that there are times where there was a time where I just stopped reading climate news because of a deep sense of hopelessness, because of the lack of, change, courage from governments and even people, they applaud Biden's bill or whatever because of the huge investments it did in climate. It also made huge expansion of like oil production.
Right. Which was a promise that he broke. I mean, that was a promise Biden broke.
Absolutely. And so it's hard to be, hopeful, right, to be honest. And what has like ignited, my fire is the climate justice movement. I went to an action this past weekend where Sunrise LA did a sit-in protest, or not this weekend, recently did a sit-in protest at Phillips 66, because this region here has the third largest urban oil field in the country. And, while fires are blazing, right, fueled by the climate crisis, these oil company, billionaires and millionaires are raking in profits, while at the same time knowing, right, through their own research since the 70s that their products, right, these fossil fuels are fueling dramatically the climate crisis. Seeing them like speak truth to power on these issues, but also at the same time, like finding ways to cultivate joy. One of the things I love about Sunrise is like their ability, or our ability, to cultivate joy and hope, even in the midst of crises. And, we've been through so many of these things before, and we have survived, right? Of course, at some, at a cost, but we survive, we rebuild, we create something new. And I just recently started reading Black Reconstruction by Dr. E.B. Du Bois, all right, on the time period that happened post-Civil War, where you see like this, brief experiments with multiracial democracy, where you have Black folks and white folks working together to create like the public school system that serves all, to make, universities college free. University of South Carolina,
Mm.
was, Richard T. Greener played a role in reintegrating that university and making it free for working class folks. And so, reading about that, right? And then, the great nadir, right, of white supremacist violence, repressing all of that. And, about 100 years later, right, we saw Dr. King and the civil rights movement reclaim and try to bring back, a lot of those rights. And so I think we're getting to that point again where that moment of that inflection point, right, of where we go from here, and hopelessness is not a direction, right? It is it is a trap, because change can happen. It has happened before, and it will happen again. And so it's really up to us on like what type of change we want that to be. And so that's also why I'm deeply trying to get as much involved as possible with my union, with United Teachers Los Angeles, because there's so much power in the union. And a lot of these issues.
There's songs about that, by the way.
Yes.
It's even people have like literally written that down before. So you might be onto something.
Yes. And class, like racism is real. And when you read about Reconstruction and about all these folks try to do is like use race as a ploy, right, to divide us when we're all actually hurting in some way. Like the Reconstruction era, according to Du Bois, was also really, yes, on one level, right, one example of Black civil rights being repressed, but also coalition of the political and the economic elites coming together. And so what we need to do is come together, right, in response to that. Class solidarity is real, right? I'm still shook, of Snoop Dogg, one of my favorite rappers. like
drive across the bridge and tell him how you feel. He deserves to hear that.
Yeah, like performing for Donald Trump, and you have Rick Ross and all these other people, and they're really showing their class. For some of them, like Soulja Boy was like, Kamala Harris didn't give me a check or whatever, and it's like, for all of these people, that's really the biggest thing. It's the money.
Hey man, I'm older than you, so we remember Snoop Dogg, back in the day. You were probably too young.
Probably.
To see him what he's doing now, it's like, oh man, that hurts. Yeah. But well, I'll tell you this on the point of hope, and this is something I think I've said to you privately, but I want to say it during your interview. It meant a lot to me, and I don't, I try to be careful with how much hyper specific district talk we do, just because a lot of people that listen to this aren't in our district, but I think they can use it as a template, right? It meant a lot to me to see just a young lefty like yourself want to get involved in that level, because again, a lot of my hope, I would say over 90% of it, is outside of electoral politics. And you mentioned unions, you mentioned movements, you mentioned strikes, you mentioned protests, you mentioned working solidarity. That's where I find my hope too. But when you're going to throw electoralism in there, of course, I find it at the local level. I've had conversations with both our former and current city council people. And I have political disagreements, strong political disagreements with both of them. Nonetheless, though, when it's at the local level, there's still a certain amount of accountability and a certain amount of transparency where you're going to see some things that you're going to like. And maybe it's a green space, maybe it's a skate park, maybe it's a certain vote. And, that doesn't mean there's not things I don't like too. That certainly exists. There's a lot of things I don't like. But there's still, I think, opportunity, no matter who that council person is. I'm sure there's some limitations, but generally speaking, there's going to be an opportunity for tangible and effective bridges that I think just doesn't exist at the higher levels. And to me, that stuff matters. Am I saying like that's the be all and end all? Of course not. But I think it does make a difference. And that's why like I get real excited when I see people like you, especially someone at your age, you know, going into that. And it was also inspiring to see, you know, people younger than me, older than me, and everything in between supporting you.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. Oh goodness. Yeah, I appreciate that.
I mean, I'm not, just to be clear, I'm not telling you go run for office again. I mean, okay. Do you? Whatever your path is, I'm here for it. But I'm just saying, like, you know, as far as hope goes, you know, how that ties into you in my life.
Yeah, you know, I'll say another thing about hope, like, you know, in the district, you know, I did, you know, I spoke to, you know, folks, you know, up and down, like, the economic scale, and, you know, different political backgrounds, some who didn't believe in politics, like, at all, who felt like there was no point in voting because change, you know, wasn't going to happen. And, you know, what gives me hope, like, is like people are at some a point or level have some level of consciousness about, I mean, of course, like they have consciousness about what's going on in their own lives, you know. And I think what it really takes is for an opportunity for people to come together and exercise, you know, those experiences, those resources that they have. Because, like, yes, electoral politics. So I think, you know, of course, I have a bias. You know, I ran for office. You know, and I think it matters. And I think it holds a place. But also, when you look at like students deserve, right? These are not even folks who are eligible to vote. These are Black high school students who are able to defund the school police here in Los Angeles and create, like, you know, the Black Student Achievement Plan, which is not under attack by conservative folks, of course. But they were able to, but that's like a, for me, people have different opinions on this. I think that's like a form of reparations type program where you are trying to repair some of those harms, right? And like Black students, you know, high school students were able to do that outside of electoral politics. Like, I don't even think UTLA had like a majority in the, you know, on the school board. Yeah, they were still able to get that done. And so I think that just speaks to the testament of what can be possible when we do engage. You know, if you are a worker and there's a union, you know, join it. Or if there's not, organize one. Or join, you know, Sunrise. Or join, you know, your local mutual aid network, you know, org. You know, like community. You know, community is really where the power is at. And, you know, with the wildfires, you know, the heartbreak, right, of, you know, not just like the property that were lost, like, of course, right, because that's, you know, loss of money and wealth and things of that nature, but also like the loss of community, right, communities being eroded, schools being destroyed, parks that, you know, folks may have gone throughout their childhood to, right, no longer being there, etc. We have Altadena, right, historically Black community because of redlining, and there's a lot of questions as to whether they'll even be able to rebuild, right, to the same extent, especially with, you know, real estate speculators trying to come in and raise rent and all these costs.
They're seeing an opportunity here. Right. Yeah. They're seeing an opportunity here, and it is very dangerous. But there's also, it's also against the law what they're trying to do. So I mean, you talk about, I mean, this is really a time where people have to come together. They need to understand. I mean, this is, if you're one of those lawyers out there who has chosen to use your powers for good, there's not a lot of them, Brian, but they do exist. And a lot of them are tenant attorneys. Please, we need you. We need
absolutely.
you.
Absolutely. And you know but like, you know, seeing that, right, but also right then again seeing like community coming out, you know, South LA Cafe and all these, you know, spaces organizing, you know, resources for those impacted. And you know what I hope and not just hope, but I'm also going to do the work, right? You have to have critical hope, right? We could hope for things to happen, but we also have to be cognizant of the fact that we are living in the darkest times, of U.S. history since the Great Nadir. We have to do the work of transforming those values and work that we've been seeing our community coming out in support of one another, even for those we don't even know who we are, or even know our names, but we're still donating, we're still feeding, we're still housing, all these things, transform that into structural change too, in our local politics upwards. And also as a society, we really, we are again at an inflection point, right, in society of where we go from here. Like it is not for a given. And I don't want to sound scary or demoralizing, but I just want to be, with a critical lens here, like Donald Trump is legal, basically making it okay to discriminate. Like they're trying to roll back everything.
That's putting it gently, what he's doing.
Yeah,
I mean that's like a very just overarching. I mean, we don't have time to get into all the nitty gritty, but I mean, as of the recording of this, what he is doing, I mean, he is destroying our institutions of public health. And I'm not saying there's not room for criticism there. I'll sometimes refer to the CDC as the Capitalism Defense Center. But, he's trying to replace things with something way worse. Yeah. And what he's doing, I mean, I'm sure I can only imagine what it feels like, especially with what you've been through, seeing what's happening now, where it's just they're going into churches, they're going into schools.
Yeah.
And they're it's frightening.
It is. And, and so also, right, the Trump, this regime that this guy's doing, like, it's real, it's scary. It's, they're trying to destroy everything, right? While at the same time also want to make, listeners be mindful if they aren't already, like, know your audience, that, under Democrats, right, there's also, like, some of those, maybe not as harsh or dramatic, but those it's still there, right, with the expansion of the police.
Sure,
it's in Atlanta, right, where you have these Democrats, a lot of whom are black, right? Not all black politicians, right? We have people who are doing good work or have been trying to, like Cori Bush and Bowman and others, but you have politicians who are Democrats.
Well, look at the mayor of New York City. I mean,
Eric Adams.
This is definitely a bipartisan effort, and believe me, you're preaching to the choir at a show like this. Yeah.
And so, being mindful of that, you have Democrats who are running to privatize public education, right? Who are heavily backed by the charter school industry, which has a history in discriminating against students of color, students with disabilities, right? Some of these charter school industry billionaire donors are also colluding with the billionaires propping up Donald Trump. And so, we have to be very, clear, follow the money, right? And also, and we also have to organize. And so with UTLA, we are organizing around all these issues around, protecting BSAP, making sure the police funding is going to programs for our youth, cops off campus. We're doing the work of making sure our schools are green, right? These crises, whether it's wildfires or the pandemic, they're really heightened of the structural inequities that have already been present, right? And so communities that are disinvested in our schools and such, don't have the air filters that they need to make sure that the indoor air quality is healthy and safe, right? And so on and so forth. And so, we're doing that work. And then for me, I'm also looking towards statewide work as well, because I know in California, like the states have, although Donald Trump is trying to put his hands in like how schools are run, how education is run, states, as of right now at least, have more control and say over our education system. And so, wanting to fight to protect ethnic studies, right, which has been under attack by the right wing, We talk a lot about, as we should, efforts to censor what is taught in our schools in these southern states. But we also see that here in California when we talk about whether it's Palestine or whether it's about like Black liberatory, like studies, right? A lot of the right wing don't want our young folks to be aware of what's going on in the world. And so, protecting ethnic studies, protecting teacher unions, right? Teacher unions are under attack under this administration, and also doing that work of cross labor organizing. And so I'm also in the LA Fed, and to go back again to Reconstruction period or before that, right, with the Civil War, with the Emancipation Proclamation Act, right, where we had hundreds of thousands of enslaved Africans who were leaving the plantation to join the army, right, and they played a huge role in ultimately, ending slavery, chattel slavery at least, and having a restricted period for how long it lasted. That was like, in some ways, I think Dr. Du Bois actually calls it like a strike, right? Because what we have there were like workers, right? But coerced free, labor, who were choosing who collectively, right, left the plantation to end white supremacy, to end white supremacist capitalism. And so, it's not the same, right? Child slavery versus what's happening now, although like there is slave labor. That's the main point I'm trying to make, is that principle of collective power, that principle of striking, right? Basically calling for a general strike.
Yeah,
right?
Well, that's where I'm at. So somebody tweeted me. And by the way, we do have to wrap this up because I'm a little worried that the internet's going to kick again. But yeah, somebody actually tweeted at me and they said, what politician do you think could fix this? And I was like, I don't think there's a politician. I think we need a general. Last name strike. And I think anything less. But so where can people go to learn more about you?
Yeah, so I just soft launched my website. It's bryantodega.com, and it has like my Instagram. I'm not active on Twitter anymore, but it has my Instagram and my LinkedIn if folks want to connect. And eventually what I want to start doing is write, do some more writing. I'm on the radio every now and then on KBLA 1580 with Dominic DePrima as like a recurring guest. I'll speak on some of these issues as well. Stay tuned on, what's next. But yeah, bryantodega.com is where folks can connect.
Well, Bryant, I am thrilled that you're back in the district that we both call home, and you're an inspiration. And I look forward to doing the work with you.
Yeah, likewise.
Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
That was Bryant Odega. Be sure to check out his website. He's an inspiration, that guy. Music for the 1000 podcast is provided by Andrew Saxon. Be sure to check out his podcast, the Baywatching Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a 5-star review, would you? Every 5-star review helps. And, of course, check out Left at Wall, wherever you get your movies. If you want to support this show on the sustainability end, you can do so over at patreon.com/romplacone. For Give What You Can level, you get all kinds of exclusive perks, insider info into upcoming films and productions, and a Zoom meetup. Every month we do a Zoom meetup. It's a really cool, supportive community. So we're having an awesome time over on Patreon, and you can become a member for as low as $1 a month. That's patreon.com/romplacone. All right, 72. Jethro Tull released Thick as a Brick in 1972. There a lot of other great albums came out that year too. I referenced the Jethro Tull album last time. I'm not just going to do a discography of Jethro Tull as we're in the 70s. I can't do that. I got to mix it up. But yeah, we're in a really cool music era right now with 72. Catch you next week. Peace. Hey guys, Ron Placone here. Take your own 1,000 challenge. No, you don't need to interview 1,000 people, although if you want to do that, go for it. Your 1,000 challenge can be whatever you want.
Maybe you want to call a friend out of the blue once a week. Maybe you want to read a book every month. Maybe you want to start a different garden every season. I guess that might be dependent on where you live. Look, the point of the challenge is taking on an endeavor that enriches your life in some way, and it can be measured. And then, of course, you do it regularly. That's what 1000 is doing for me, and hopefully for you too. The main reason for this podcast and every podcast I've ever done is to build community. So take your own challenge. Then join our Facebook group. It's called 1000 What's Your Challenge? ? That's 1000 What's Your Challenge ? And post about what your 1000 challenge is and the progress you're making. All I ask is that people be encouraging of each other's challenges. This is personal and vulnerable, so be cool. There's enough negativity on social media. We don't need to add to it. For those of you who aren't on Facebook, hopefully in the future we'll be expanding to places like Discord, Reddit, but for now, we're starting on Facebook. And again, that Facebook group is called 1000 What's Your Challenge? See you there.